Why was she staring at the tourist as if he didn't belong in the world she guarded? He hadn't done anything wrong. Not yet. Just a careless step, a glance too curious, a pause too long at the edge of the checkpoint. Most would have ignored him. She couldn't. Her rifle was still resting against the sand-colored wall behind her, camouflaged beneath a canvas sheet. Her uniform looked ordinary, her posture tired, almost civilian. And maybe that was the point. Nobody suspected her, not even him. Not even the men in uniform a few meters away, joking about rations and weekend leave. She was the shadow among them, the one with no name stitched into her chest, no medals to catch the light. But when the tourist shifted his weight one step too close to the restricted zone, her hand twitched. Not to draw, not yet, just a silent, instinctive measure. Because she had learned the hard way that danger doesn't always look like danger. The heat pressed against her skin, sharp and relentless. Dusk carried the smell of diesel and old sweat, mixed with something sharper, fear maybe, though fear never had a single scent. She blinked against the sunlight. To anyone watching, she seemed almost bored. Inside, she counted breaths. 1, 2, 3. He didn't notice, he didn't even glance her way. Why would he? She looked like no one. But that was her power, the unseen, the unnoticed. She hadn't asked for this role. Not once in her childhood, growing up in a quiet street where her father fixed old radios and her mother folded laundry on the balcony, had she dreamed of becoming a ghost with a rifle. But life is rarely about dreams. It's about choices made when there's nothing left to choose. She remembered the day the letter came. The one that pulled her away from lectures, from the half-read books stacked on her desk, from a brother who teased her relentlessly about her bad handwriting. The letter was sharp in its simplicity. You are needed. She didn't hesitate. Not because she wanted to fight, but because she couldn't let others carry what she felt should also be hers. Her brother had been gone 6 months by then. Gone in a way that uniforms never say directly. Lost in service, they called it. But she knew the truth: he was taken by a bullet that someone, somewhere thought was worth more than his life. She hadn't even been allowed to see him. Just a folded flag, just silence at dinner, just her mother's hands trembling every time the door creaked. That silence became her fuel. So when they trained her to see what others couldn't, she leaned in. When they told her to hold her breath, steady her hands, and wait for hours without moving, she didn't complain. Waiting was already a part of her. Her grief had taught her stillness. Her loss had trained her patience. Now, years later, here she stood, watching, always watching. The tourist adjusted his camera. His finger hovered, just a picture maybe, or maybe not. His eyes lingered too long on the concrete towers, on the wires, on the guards with rifles slung lazily at their sides. Her heartbeat slowed, trained, focused. Nobody else noticed. That was the curse, and the gift. She wanted to look away, to dismiss the thought as paranoia, but she had done that once before. In another town, another dusty street. A woman with a shawl had paused too long by the marketplace wall. Everyone else had laughed, just waiting for someone. Don't overthink it. But she had felt it, the weight of something unseen. By the time they discovered the device strapped beneath the shawl, it was too late. She could still hear the echoes, still see the flash, still feel the silence after screams. Never again. So she watched. The tourist lifted his lens, smiled, clicked. Ordinary, too ordinary, but his eyes betrayed something else: calculation. The way they darted, not at the faces, but at the angles, the distances, the structures. Her throat tightened. She whispered into her calm, low, controlled. Left side, blue shirt, 30 meters, watching the perimeter, not the people. The guards didn't move at first. One rolled his eyes, muttered back, "Tourist, let him be." She said nothing, just watched. Because there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Her brother had written her a letter before his last mission. She had memorized every word. Trust your instincts. They'll try to train it out of you. Don't let them. So she didn't. Her fingers brushed the strap of her rifle. The sunlight shifted. Shadows lengthened across the checkpoint. Somewhere behind her, a radio crackled, lazy voices spilling static and laughter. The ordinary world continued, but in her chest, time tightened. Why was the tourist adjusting again? Why was he stepping closer, almost into the line no civilian ever crossed without a warning? She held her breath, waited. A child ran past, chasing a deflated ball. The tourist froze for half a second, just enough. His hand twitched, not toward the child, not toward the camera, but toward his side, a hesitation, a flicker, a mistake. And in that instant she knew. Her voice cut through the calm like steel. "Stop him now." The guards looked up, startled. One shouted, raising his hand. Too slow, too late. But she was already moving. Her body flowed into the rhythm she had practiced in silence for years. A single motion, pull, shoulder, breath, aim. The weight of the unseen now fully seen. The tourist's eyes widened. Surprise, almost disbelief, as if he never expected her. As if he thought power only wore visible uniforms, only shouted commands. He hadn't imagined her. That was his mistake. The world narrowed to one line, one breath, one choice. But she hesitated, just for a second. Because inside the conflict burned. Was this justice? Or vengeance? Was she saving lives or just replaying her brother's silence through another man's chest? Her finger trembled. The dust stung her eyes. Somewhere the child's ball rolled to a stop. The air held its breath. She thought of her brother's voice. "Trust your instincts." And then, the shout of boots, the rush of bodies. Guards finally surged, tackling him down before she pulled the trigger. His camera shattered on the concrete. Metal pieces clinked across the ground, sharper than glass. Wires spilled out. Not just a camera, never just a camera. She exhaled. Slow, shaking, silent. The guards cursed, struggling to hold him down. The tourist spat words in a language she only half understood. Rage, resistance, not innocence. Her rifle lowered, her chest ached. And yet no one looked at her, not really. The guards shouted commands, radioed reports, dragged him away. Their voices filled the air, but no one asked how she knew. No one asked why she saw what they didn't. She stood apart, unseen again. And that was fine, that was her place, the shadow behind the moment. But deep inside, she wondered, how many more times would she stand at the edge of silence, carrying weight no one else could see? How many more times would her instincts decide between life and death? The wind carried dust across the checkpoint. The child picked up his ball. Life resumed its careless rhythm. But she knew nothing was the same, not for him, not for her. And somewhere inside, beneath the silence, a question lingered. If the world never saw her power, did it even exist? What did it mean when silence lingered longer than voices? When the shouting stopped, the reports were filed, and the man was dragged away in chains, but the echo of her almost decision wouldn't leave. She stood alone again, though surrounded by uniforms. The guards smoked cigarettes, muttered about paperwork, cursed the heat. One of them joked about tourists and cameras, laughter sharp and careless. But she didn't laugh. She couldn't. Because she had hesitated. That second of doubt, it haunted her more than the discovery of wires and explosives inside the shattered device. If they hadn't been quick enough, if the child had lingered one step longer. Her chest tightened. She looked at her hands, steady now, but she remembered the tremor, the thought that almost pulled her away from the shot. Would her brother have hesitated? That question cut deeper than anything else. Night fell heavy and restless. The desert wind cooled, but inside her heat still burned. She sat alone in the dim barracks, rifle disassembled on the table before her. Each piece cleaned, wiped, oiled. Each motion practiced, exact. And yet her thoughts scattered like loose rounds. The letter, his handwriting. She had memorized every curve of the ink, every uneven line. She whispered the words to herself sometimes, like prayer, "Trust your instincts." But what if her instincts were broken? The bunkroom around her was filled with muffled snores. boots lined neatly beneath beds. A fan rattled overhead, pushing warm air in circles. She worked by dim light, slow, methodical. She always cleaned her rifle when she couldn't quiet her mind. And tonight her mind refused silence. She remembered the tourist's eyes, that flicker of disbelief when he realized she had seen him. He hadn't expected her. No one ever did. She thought about that too. The invisibility, the anonymity. Sometimes it felt like protection. Other times it felt like erasure. If no one acknowledged what she saw, what she carried, did it mean she was only a shadow, a tool? Her breath caught. She pressed her palm against the rifle's stock, grounding herself. Outside, a dog barked at nothing. Distant thunder rolled across the horizon, though rain rarely came. She closed her eyes, and when she did, she saw her brother. Not the folded flag, not the silence of the officer at the door, but his grin, mischievous, always one step ahead of her. She saw the way he teased her when she fell asleep over her books, the way he tried to juggle apples in the kitchen and always dropped one. He had been the loud one, the fearless one, the one who never hesitated. And now he was gone. She whispered into the empty room, "I almost didn't stop him." The fan rattled on. No answer, just the sound of her own guilt. She slept little, dreams twisted, sharp and restless. By dawn, her eyes stung from the weight of them. The orders came swift, debriefing at headquarters. She packed her kit without a word, slung her rifle case across her shoulder, and followed the convoy into the city. The ride was long, dust trailing behind armored wheels. She sat in silence, helmet pressed against the window, watching barren stretches of land blur past. No one spoke to her. No one asked what she had seen or how she knew. She was a passenger, invisible in plain sight. At headquarters, the briefing room smelled of stale coffee and sweat. Officers shuffled papers, tapped pens against notepads, spoke in clipped sentences. She sat at the back, quiet, listening as they debated protocol, border security, intelligence reports. Her name was not mentioned. Until one voice cut through. "Sniper, you." Her eyes lifted. The senior officer's gaze met hers, sharp, unreadable. "You stopped him." She nodded once, simple, controlled. "How?" She hesitated, not from doubt this time, but from memory. How did she explain instinct? How did she explain the way silence has weight, how shadows feel heavier when they hide something, how eyes betray secrets no uniform can cover? "I watched," she said finally. The officer frowned, waiting for more. She gave none. The room shifted. Some scoffed. One man shook his head, muttering about luck. Another scribbled something on a page, dismissive. But the officer kept his eyes on her, searching. Then he said words that made her chest tighten. "You'll be reassigned." The room murmured. She held her breath. "Special Operations, Observation Unit, you'll work alone." Alone, the word echoed, heavy, familiar. She nodded again, no protest, no question. But inside, the conflict sparked. Was this trust or exile? A reward for what she had seen, or a quiet way of pushing her further into invisibility? That night she prepared in silence. A new assignment, a new location, a new set of walls and shadows. She packed light, she always did. Rifle, uniform, letter, that was all she needed. The drive to the outpost was longer, remote, the kind of place maps forgot, the kind of place where silence wasn't just heavy, it was absolute. She arrived at dusk. The air smelled of stone and dry earth. The sky stretched wide, endless, painted in bleeding colors of sunset. The outpost was small, almost fragile against the vastness around it. A handful of soldiers, a tower, a fence that looked more symbolic than strong. They greeted her with brief nods. No warmth but no hostility either, just acceptance. Another body, another shadow. She was shown to her quarters, a small room with a single cot, a desk, and a window that looked out into nothing. She placed her rifle case against the wall, set the letter on the desk, sat in silence. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something unfamiliar: fear. Not fear of enemies, not fear of death, but fear of being swallowed by the silence she had been given, alone with her thoughts, alone with her ghosts. The next day, duty began. Observation, watching patterns, logging movements, waiting for what might never come. She settled into the rhythm, binoculars pressed against her brow, rifle at her side, hours stretched like lifetimes, days blurred. The desert whispered nothing but heat and silence. And in that silence, doubts grew. Had she truly saved anyone that day? Or had the guards, slower but louder, been the real hand that stopped him? Was she fooling herself, building meaning from instinct that might only be coincidence? She clenched her jaw, shook the thought away. But it always returned. At night she read the letter again, traced the ink with her fingertip, whispered the words into the dark. Trust your instincts. She wanted to believe, needed to believe. But sometimes in the silence she heard another voice, her own, whispering, "What if your instincts fail next time?" And then came the sound that broke her. A crack, sharp, distant, not thunder, not stone, a shot. Her body froze, every nerve alive. She grabbed the rifle, heart hammering, eyes scanning the horizon. And in that moment she knew, silence never lasts. Something was coming. What do you do when the silence you've been living with suddenly fractures? When one sound slices through the stillness and reminds you that danger is never far, only patient. The shot echoed faint but sharp across the barren land. A single crack, clean, precise, not random. She lowered her binoculars, breath stalled in her throat. The horizon stretched wide, desert, ridges, fractured stone. Nothing moved, nothing obvious. She pressed her cheek to the rifle stock, scanned the sightline. Slow sweeps, careful, but the land refused to give its secrets. Her radio stayed silent. No chatter, no alarms, which meant two things. Either she was the only one who heard it or the only one paying attention. Her pulse beat in her ears. She whispered into the calm, "Did anyone register a shot?" Static, then a voice, distracted, dismissive. "Negative, probably rocks shifting. Wind carries sound here." She almost cursed but stopped herself. Her instincts didn't care about wind. That sound had been deliberate. She knew the language of rifles, the sharp beginning, the clean fade. This wasn't stone. This wasn't accident. Her finger tightened against the trigger, though there was no target yet. Just silence again. Silence that mocked her. And she thought of her brother. Because that's how it happened to him, wasn't it? A sound nobody else took seriously. A moment dismissed. By the time they realized it, by the time they listened, it was already too late. She wouldn't repeat that. So she stayed at the window long after the others returned to routine. Hours passed. The sun bent low, dragging shadows across the earth. Her eyes burned. Her back stiffened. But she didn't move. Not until darkness blurred the edges of the land. That night she couldn't sleep. The cot creaked under her restless weight. The fan clicked overhead. But the sound of that single shot replayed again and again in her skull. What if it had been a warning, a message, a test? She sat up, rubbed her eyes, pressed her palms against her face until she saw stars. She whispered to the silence, "Why me? Why always me?" The silence gave nothing back. By morning, she decided. She couldn't trust the others to see what she saw. She couldn't wait for permission to listen to her instincts. She would watch harder, closer, alone if she had to. Days blurred again, long hours of nothingness. Her eyes memorized every ridge, every stone, every shadow that shifted with the sun. She mapped them in her mind, so when something changed, even slightly, she would know. And one afternoon, something did. A flicker of movement near the ridge, tiny, almost nothing. She raised the binoculars, focused. At first only heat distortion, waves bending light, but then there, a glint, a flash too precise to be natural, like glass, like scope. Her chest clenched. She whispered, "West Ridge, elevation mark 12, possible sightline." Again the response came lazy. "Copy, probably scrap metal. Farmers dump things up there." She wanted to scream, but she only pressed harder against the glass, refusing to blink. The glint disappeared, shadows shifted, gone. Her mind whispered doubt. Maybe they were right, maybe she was seeing ghosts. But ghosts had weight. That night she dreamed of her brother again. He was laughing, tossing an apple, missing the catch. And then, without warning, his laughter turned into silence. She woke gasping, clutching the letter at her chest. The next morning she didn't report what she saw. She kept it to herself. Logged it in her private notebook, a simple worn journal, pages filled with sketches of the ridges, notes of times, shadows, sounds. Her own record, her own truth. Because if the others wouldn't believe, she would build proof. Still, the weight pressed heavier. The more she trusted her instincts, the more alone she became. She could feel the distance growing. The guards at the outpost joked without her, smoked without her, lived without her. She was there, but she was a ghost among the living. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, a young private approached her. He was barely 20, freckles across his nose, eyes too soft for this place. He sat on the edge of the tower, legs dangling. "You don't talk much," he said quietly. She didn't look at him, just kept the binoculars pressed. He shrugged. "The others say you're cold, but I don't think so." That made her glance at him. His face was open, unguarded. He reminded her of her brother, just younger, untouched by the worst parts of war. "Why do you think that?" she asked softly. "Because you're always watching," he said. "Cold people don't watch, they look away." Her throat tightened. She wanted to answer but couldn't. He smiled faintly, almost embarrassed. "My mom used to say the same thing about me, always watching. I'd sit at the window for hours. My dad thought I was lazy, but she said it was a kind of courage, to notice things." Courage, she almost laughed. Was hesitation courage? Was doubt? But something in his words settled into her. A small reminder that maybe being unseen didn't mean being nothing. Still, she didn't tell him about the shot, or the glint, or the notebook full of doubts she couldn't erase. Some burdens weren't meant to be shared. The days stretched, the silence thickened, and then came the night when everything shifted. She was on watch, moonlight silvering the barren land. The air was cool, almost tender against her skin. She scanned the ridge as always. And then movement, real this time, sharp, intentional. 3 figures dark against the pale stone, crawling low, too careful to be wanderers. Her heart slammed. She whispered into the calm. Movement, West Ridge, 3 figures, armed, approaching slow. This time no dismissal. The outpost stirred, voices sharpened, boots scrambled. She kept her eye to the scope, steady, focused. The figures paused. One lifted something glass glinting, a scope, a rifle. She exhaled, the world narrowed. One breath, one line, one choice. Her finger found the trigger. And this time, no hesitation. The shot cracked sharp into the night, echoed across the barren silence. One figure dropped, the others scattered, retreating into the ridge's shadow. Shouts erupted behind her, alarms blared, soldiers rushed to positions. But she didn't move, didn't even breathe, just watched the ridge where shadows swallowed the retreat. And in her chest, 2 truths collided. She had acted, she had saved them. But the silence after her shot was heavier than ever. Because now she knew the ridge wasn't just stone, it was alive, watching back. The outpost wasn't invisible, it was marked. And she whispered into the dark, almost a prayer. "They'll come again." Why did her hands stay steady, even after the shot? Why did her body obey the training while her heart screamed against the silence that followed? The man she had dropped lay somewhere beyond the ridge now, swallowed by the desert's night. Maybe he was dead, maybe not. She would never know. She would never see his face, never hear his name, never know if he carried regret or conviction in his chest. All she knew was that he hadn't walked away. And that knowledge weighed more than the rifle in her hands. The others cheered, they clapped her shoulder, voices loud in the small outpost. "Good shot, perfect timing, you saved us." But their words slid off her like water against stone. She nodded, but her eyes kept drifting to the ridge, to the darkness, to the silence that stretched longer than their laughter. Because she knew what they didn't. One shot never ends it. One enemy never stands alone. And if 3 had come tonight, more would come tomorrow. Sleep was impossible. She lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to its tired clicks. Her body felt heavy, but her mind refused rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ridge again, saw the glint of glass, heard the echo of her own shot. And then she saw her brother. Not laughing this time, not juggling apples, just standing in the distance, silent, eyes unreadable. And when she reached for him, he turned and disappeared into the ridge. She woke gasping, sweat cold against her skin. Her hand fumbled for the letter on the desk, gripping it as though the paper itself could anchor her. Trust your instincts. But what if her instincts chained her to ghosts? By morning, the outpost was buzzing. Reports were filed, radio chatter thick with urgency, patrols doubled, watch rotations tightened. And yet life went on, cigarettes lit, coffee boiled in dented tins, jokes cracked between nervous glances. Only she stayed silent, watching, waiting. The young private, the one with freckles and soft eyes, found her at the tower. He leaned against the railing, chewing sunflower seeds, spitting shells into the dust below. "You were right," he said. She didn't look at him, just kept her eye pressed to the glass. "You saw them before anyone else, twice now." She said nothing. He shifted awkwardly. "The others think you're strange, but I think it takes something different to see like you do." Finally she lowered the binoculars, met his eyes. They were honest, too honest. "You think seeing helps?" she asked quietly. He shrugged. "It kept us alive last night, didn't it?" Alive, the word rang hollow, because she knew what it cost. Every life saved was another weight on her chest, another shadow in her silence. Still she said nothing, just returned to the glass. Days blurred again. The ridge stayed quiet, but quiet never meant safe. Quiet was a mask. She felt it pressing closer each day, like the land itself was holding its breath. And then came the storm. Not of bullets, not yet, but of nature. The sky cracked open one afternoon, thunder rolling deep across the desert. Rain poured sudden, fierce, drenching the outpost in seconds. The earth turned to mud. Visibility dropped to nothing. Radios hissed with static. Most of the soldiers, cursed, took cover, waited it out. But she stayed in the tower, drenched, unblinking, because storms gave cover, and cover gave opportunity. Her scope cut through sheets of rain, blurring everything into shapes. She squinted, breath fogging against the glass. And then she saw it. Movement faint, a shadow against shadows, slipping closer through the storm. Her pulse spiked. She whispered into the calm, "Contact, south perimeter," one figure moving low. Static drowned her, no clear reply. She steadied her rifle, tracked the figure, waited. But then a flash of lightning, and in that split second the figure wasn't a soldier, wasn't an enemy, it was a child. Her chest seized, she froze. The boy couldn't have been more than 12, clothes torn, feet bare. He stumbled through the mud, arms wrapped tight around his chest, his face lifted briefly, eyes wide, terrified. Her finger hovered on the trigger. Every nerve screamed to act, but not how, not what. The storm raged. The boy slipped, fell to his knees, scrambled up again. She whispered, almost to herself, "Why is he here?" No answer, just the storm. And then behind him, another shadow, taller, armed, moving with purpose. Her scope tightened. It wasn't a child alone, it was bait. Her lungs burned. One shot could drop the man. One shot could save the boy, but what if it wasn't bait? What if it truly was just a child lost in the storm? Her finger trembled. She tasted iron on her tongue. And for the second time in her life, she hesitated. The armed man reached for the boy. The boy screamed, voice thin and sharp against thunder. Her instinct snapped. She fired. The man collapsed into the mud, rifle slipping from his hands. The boy froze, stared at the fallen shadow, stared at the tower, at her. For a heartbeat their eyes met through the storm, hers hidden behind glass, his wide with shock. Then he ran, vanished into the sheets of rain. Her hands shook, the rifle felt heavier than ever. When the storm passed, the land looked scrubbed raw. Mud streaked the earth. The air smelled sharp, metallic. The outpost stirred, confused, asking what had happened. She gave them nothing, just one down. But inside, her silence screamed. She hadn't saved the boy. She hadn't caught him. Hadn't known if he was bait or victim. She had only acted like instinct demanded. And now his eyes haunted her, wide, terrified, unforgettable. That night she couldn't even look at the letter, couldn't whisper the words, couldn't pretend instinct was enough. Instead, she sat in the dark, rifle across her lap, whispering a different question. What if I'm wrong next time? The fan clicked. The night gave no answer. And somewhere beyond the ridge, shadows were listening. How many nights could she sit in silence before silence itself became unbearable? The storm had passed, but its echo stayed with her. The boy's eyes, wide, terrified, questioning, burned against the back of her mind. She had pulled the trigger, but she hadn't delivered safety. She had delivered something else, something that left her restless, staring into the dark with the letter clenched in her fist. By dawn, the desert felt different, heavier. The ridge no longer looked like stone, it looked like teeth, waiting to bite. The others didn't feel it, or they ignored it. They laughed over tin mugs of coffee, grumbled about wet boots, argued about cards. Life rolled on in the way soldiers make it roll, pretending danger is distant until it is. But she couldn't pretend, because she remembered her brother's silence. And silence here was never empty. She kept to the tower. Hours bled together. The journal filled with sketches, arrows, small notes, faint tracks south ridge, dust pattern, unusual, possible recon. She mapped them obsessively, convinced patterns hid in the chaos. The young private noticed. One evening, when the sun melted into the horizon and painted everything gold, he leaned against the railing beside her. "You don't sleep much," he said. She didn't answer. He tried again. "You keep that notebook like it's a diary." Her throat tightened. She almost said, "It's not a diary, it's proof that I'm not crazy." But she didn't. She just kept scanning the ridge. The boy shrugged, spit another sunflower seed into the dust below. "My dad kept a journal, not like that, more about life. Little things, what the neighbors said, what he dreamed. I never understood it as a kid." She lowered the binoculars, looked at him. His freckles caught the dying sunlight. He seemed too soft for this world, but maybe that was why he survived it, by holding on to softness. "Do you understand it now?" she asked quietly. He thought for a moment. Yeah, I think he wanted proof he existed, that someone would remember the little things even if nobody cared. The words slipped under her ribs like a blade, proof of existence. That was what she craved too. But all she had were ghosts. That night she opened her journal not to write about ridges or shadows, but to write about him, her brother. She wrote about his laugh, the way he cracked his knuckles when nervous, the way he stole her pencils and snapped them in half just to annoy her, the way he once stayed up all night helping her fix a broken bike, even though he had patrol at dawn. She wrote until her hand cramped, and when she finished, she stared at the words, afraid of them. Because if she wrote them, it meant she remembered, but it also meant he was gone. Sleep came heavy and fractured. She dreamed of him again. This time he was on the ridge, shouting something she couldn't hear, She lifted her rifle, aimed, tried to see clearer. But when the scope focused, the figure wasn't him. It was the boy from the storm, eyes wide, mouth open, silent scream. She woke shaking, and in that fragile morning light, the ridge answered. Gunfire. Sharp, measured, coordinated. The outpost erupted. Boots thudded against dirt, alarms wailed, radios crackled. Shouts filled the air, sharp with panic. She grabbed her rifle, raced to the tower. Smoke curled from the ridge, muzzle flashes like sparks in the dark. The enemy had come closer, bolder. Her scope found them, silhouettes darting, rifles spitting fire. She exhaled, steady, let instinct carry her. One breath, one line, one shot. A figure dropped. But for everyone she felled, two more seemed to rise. The air filled with the sting of cordite, the crash of bullets tearing into walls. The outpost groaned under the assault. Dust rained from the tower beams. The young private crouched beside her, pale but steady, loading magazines with shaking hands. "They're pushing hard," he muttered. She didn't answer. She fired again and again. The ridge lit with muzzle flashes. The night turned alive with noise. And through it all she felt it. The enemy wasn't trying to take the outpost. Not yet. They were testing, probing, learning. Every shot fired wasn't just to kill, it was to measure. Her gut twisted. She whispered almost to herself, "They're watching us." The private looked at her, confused. But then the radio barked orders, drowning her words. Hours stretched like years. The firefight finally ebbed, leaving smoke curling across the ridge. The silence that followed was jagged, broken. The soldiers slumped against walls, faces streaked with dust and sweat. They counted their own, one wounded, none dead this time. The commander called it a victory. But she didn't. Because victory wasn't silence. It wasn't surviving a test. It was knowing the test wouldn't come again, and she knew it would. That night the outpost reeked of sweat, blood, and exhaustion. Cigarettes burned faster. Voices cracked with false laughter. Fear hid behind bravado. She sat alone, cleaning her rifle, hands steady but heart heavy. The private found her again. He lowered himself onto the cot across from hers, face pale, freckles muted under grime. "You saved me out there," he said. Her jaw tightened. "No, you saved yourself, you stayed." He shook his head. "I would have panicked if you weren't there." She looked at him, and for the first time her voice softened. "Don't put your survival on someone else. It'll break you." He frowned. "Is that what broke you?" The question pierced deeper than he knew. She didn't answer, couldn't. Instead, she turned the letter over in her hands. His eyes followed. "What's that?" he asked. She hesitated. For months, the letter had been her private anchor, the one piece of her brother she allowed herself. But something in the private's eyes, the honesty, the youth, made her unfold it. Slowly. She held it out. He read silently, lips moving faintly over the words. When he finished, he looked at her, eyes soft. "He trusted you," he said. Her throat burned. "Or cursed me." "No," he said firmly, "he trusted you." The words lingered long after he left. She lay awake, the letter pressed against her chest. The ridge loomed in her thoughts, sharper than ever. The firefight had proven it. The enemy wasn't guessing. They were studying, waiting. And for the first time, she wondered if she could outlast them. Because how long can one person watch before the watching consumes her? The desert wind rattled the thin walls. The silence stretched heavy. And somewhere beyond the ridge, unseen eyes waited. How long can walls hold when the silence beyond them grows sharper than the bullets that strike? It began before dawn, a sound she had never trusted, too ordered to be wind, too steady to be nothing. Shovels. The ridge trembled faintly with the rhythm of digging. Not close, but not far enough either. The enemy was entrenching, preparing. She pressed her cheek to the scope, glass chilled against her skin. She searched the shadows until her eyes ached. Then movement, Figures on the ridge, not reckless this time, measured, deliberate. They weren't probing anymore, they were building. By the time the sun clawed its way up the horizon, the others had noticed too. Murmurs spread. The commander's voice cut sharp orders, radios hummed with clipped urgency. Reinforcements were requested, promises were made, but she knew the truth, promises traveled slower than bullets. The outpost was alone. She sat in the tower, muscles coiled, hands wrapped too tightly around the rifle. She could feel it in her bones, the way the enemy's patience would pay off. She whispered to herself as if numbing it gave her control. They're coming. Hours crawled. The air thickened. Soldiers busied themselves with repairs, sandbags, cleaning weapons already clean, anything to avoid starring too long at the ridge. The young private tried jokes, tried stories. His voice cracked in ways he hoped she didn't notice. She did. Finally, as the heat swelled and the desert shimmered, he asked the question no one else dared. What if they don't stop? Her throat tightened. She looked at him, really looked. He was young enough to still carry the smell of home, not war. His freckles, the awkward set of his jaw, the restless way he shifted his weight, he didn't belong in the shadow of death. Not yet. And yet here he was. They won't stop, she said finally, her voice low, steady, truthful. Not until they decide this place doesn't matter, or until we prove it does. His brow furrowed. And how do we do that? She didn't answer because she didn't know. That night the ridge lit like fire. Mortars screamed overhead. The ground shuddered with each impact. Dust filled the lungs, choked the air, stung the eyes. The outpost convulsed under the barrage. Walls cracked. Sandbags tore. The tower shook like it wanted to collapse beneath her. She gritted her teeth, pressed herself against the rifle, steadied the scope through the chaos. Shapes moved in the flashes. She fired breath, fire, breath. Each shot a stitch against the tearing fabric of defense. The young private was beside her, hauling ammo, his hands trembling but refusing to let go. His face pale, eyes wide, but he stayed. Reloading, he shouted over the roar. She didn't answer, just fired again and again. The night bled into something beyond time. Screams, orders, explosions, then silence, not peace, just pause. The outpost smoldered. Smoke curled from shattered walls. Bodies were dragged, counted, covered. Too many, always too many. The commander's voice cracked as he spoke of endurance, of holding the line, of reinforcements on the way. But she knew better. She sat on the broken steps of the tower, blood drying on her cheek, the letter clutched in her hand. Her chest felt hollow, but her mind burned. Her brother's voice came back, low, rough, tired. Sometimes you fight because no one else can. But what if she couldn't anymore? She stared at the ridge. Shadows moved again, not in assault, not in retreat, watching, measuring, always measuring. Her skin crawled. Later, when the private sat beside her, silent for once, she finally spoke. You asked me how we prove this place matters. He nodded faintly. It matters, she said slowly, because if we break, they learn something. They learn we're fragile. They learn silence wins, and then they'll carry that lesson beyond these ridges. The private swallowed, lips trembling. And if we don't break? She looked at him, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. Then we teach them something else. For a moment the boy seemed older, his jaw set, his shoulders straightened. He nodded. But when he walked away, she saw the tremor in his hands, the fear in his steps, the youth still clinging to him like a curse. She turned back to the ridge. The journal lay open on her lap, pages fluttering in the wind. She sketched the new trenches, the angles of fire, the shifting lines of shadow, every mark a defiance. But beneath the notes, she wrote something else. One line. If I break, let it be after they do. The days that followed blurred into one long siege. Nights of gunfire, days of repairs, every hour stretching thin between hope and collapse. The radio hissed with distant promises of support. Still, The ridge loomed closer. Sleep became a stranger. She drifted in and out, haunted by dreams of her brother shouting from the ridge, of the boy's silent scream, of her own breath fogging the scope until she couldn't see. And yet she stayed. Because leaving wasn't an option. Because the ridge demanded an answer. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, the private joined her again in the tower. His face was thinner now, harder, but his eyes still searched hers for something: strength, truth, maybe even salvation. "Do you think anyone will remember this?" he asked suddenly. The question hit harder than any bullet. She thought of her brother, of the letter, of the journal filled with sketches no one would ever read. Her chest ached. "Maybe not the world," she said softly, "but someone will, someone always remembers." He nodded, though his lips trembled. "Then I'll remember." The words broke something in her, a dam she had held too long. She pressed her hands against her face, breathing hard, fighting tears. She hadn't cried since the letter, not once. The boy didn't move closer, didn't try to comfort, he just sat there, silent, present. And in that silence she realized something. She wasn't carrying the ridge alone anymore. What happens when silence doesn't just return, but feels like it's waiting for you to break first? The ridge was quiet again, too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed against your skin, crawled into your lungs, made every breath feel stolen. She scanned the horizon, eyes burning, scope trembling faintly in her hands. Trenches lined the ridge now, cut deep into the earth, shadows pooled where no shadows had been before. The enemy wasn't hiding, they were waiting. And the waiting was worse than any firefight. The others knew it too. Jokes had dried up, laughter was gone, voices were clipped, mechanical. Soldiers moved like ghosts, patching walls already patched, checking ammo already counted. Even the private had gone quiet. She caught him one afternoon, sitting on a crate with his rifle across his knees, staring at nothing. His freckles seemed paler, his lips pressed thin. She sat beside him without a word. Minutes passed, then he whispered, almost to himself, "Do you think they know we're just people?" Her chest tightened. He turned, eyes wide, searching hers. "I mean, when they look at us through their scopes, do they see monsters, or do they see me?" She wanted to lie, wanted to say they see you as you are, human, fragile, afraid, but the truth was crueler. "They don't see you," she said softly. "Not really. They see the uniform, the gun, the wall." His shoulders sagged. "So none of this matters, who we are." She looked at him, at the rawness in his voice, and said what she wasn't sure she believed. "It matters to us." That night she dreamed of her brother again. But this time he wasn't on the ridge. He was inside the tower, standing in the smoke, face lit by muzzle flashes. He held the letter in his hand, the edges burned. "You can't keep carrying me," he said. His voice cracked with something like sorrow. "You'll drop someone else." She woke gasping, sweat slick on her skin, the letter clutched against her chest. The ridge answered at dawn. Mortars screamed again, louder, closer. The ground split with fire. Bullets tore through sandbags, ripped across metal, punched into flesh. The outpost convulsed. She fired until her shoulder bruised, her cheekbone ached, her breath broke. Figures moved in the trenches, closer, closer still. The line between watching and striking blurred. The private shouted, voice raw, "They're breaching." The walls shuddered, smoke poured into the tower, screams cut sharp through the chaos. And then she saw it. A gap, small, almost invisible. An angle in the enemy trenches. One strike there, one precise shot could collapse the earth, bury a flank, buy time. But it meant leaving the tower, leaving the boy. Her chest seized. The tower was his anchor. If she left, if he faced the storm without her, he might break. She looked at him, his hands shaking as he shoved another magazine into her rifle, his eyes wide but burning with something more than fear now. Trust. "You stay," she said, voice cutting through the chaos. "You hold this, no matter what." His face blanched, "Where are you going?" She didn't answer. She just grabbed the journal, the letter tucked inside, and slipped down the broken steps into the fire. The outpost roared around her. Dust, blood, screams. She moved low, fast, breath tearing in her chest. Every shadow felt like teeth. Every flash felt like the last thing she'd see. She reached the edge, pressed herself against broken stone, peered through the smoke. There the weak point. A mound of earth braced too thin, dug too shallow. She steadied her rifle, lined the shot. One breath. One line. The earth collapsed. The trench buckled, screams rose sharp, then silenced under falling dirt. The flank faltered. The pressure eased just enough. She staggered back, heart hammering. The ridge spat fire, but the angle had shifted. For now they had bought space. She forced herself back toward the tower, lungs burning, legs heavy. She climbed the broken steps, the letter still clutched in her fist. The boy was there, still firing, still shaking, but still there. His eyes widened when he saw her. Relief cracked across his face like sunlight through storm clouds. "You came back," he gasped. Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him, of course, wanted to tell him she'd never leave, but the words stuck, because she knew one day she might not. The barrage slowed. The night thinned. Silence returned, jagged, cruel. The outpost bled, but it stood. Soldiers slumped against walls, faces hollow. The commander's voice was gone, replaced by whispers, by groans, by the rustle of bandages. She sat on the cold floor of the tower, the boy beside her, both too exhausted to speak. Her hands trembled as she opened the journal. She wrote nothing about the trenches, the earth, the fire. She wrote only one line. "If I can't save them all, let me save one." The boy leaned against the wall, eyes closed, rifle across his lap. His breathing was uneven but steady. She watched him, and in his tired face she saw her brother again. Not the soldier who died, but the boy who once stayed up all night fixing her bike. The boy who believed she could do anything. And for the first time in years, she let herself whisper his name. The wind carried it into the silence. And the ridge, for once, did not answer. How many times can silence return before you realize it isn't silence at all, but an answer? The ridge had gone still again, not the patient waiting of before, not the testing silence of trenches. This was different, heavy, final. She knew it the moment she woke. The air carried it. The way soldiers moved carried it. Even the boy felt it. She saw it in his eyes when dawn bled over the horizon, painting the sky red. This was the day. The radio cracked with static, promises again, reinforcements on the way. A line repeated so often it had lost meaning. The commander barked orders, but his voice shook under the weight of words he no longer believed. She cleaned her rifle in silence. Her hands didn't tremble this time. They moved with ritual, with finality. The boy sat across from her, pale but steady. He didn't ask questions anymore. He just watched, his freckles dulled by grime, his youth hardened by siege. When she finished, she slid the rifle into place, lifted her eyes to his. "Today," she said softly, "you don't flinch." He swallowed, nodded once. The ridge erupted. Mortars screamed. Gunfire shredded the air. The outpost convulsed under the heaviest barrage yet. Sandbags burst like veins. Walls split. The tower shook. She pressed her cheek to the scope, exhaled slow, let instinct carry her. Targets rose and fell. Every shot was a thread, sewing survival into chaos. The boy fired beside her, jaw clenched, shoulders rigid. His shots weren't perfect, but they were steady. He didn't flinch. The enemy came closer. Figures swarmed through smoke, pouring from trenches like shadows made flesh. The outpost groaned under the weight of their assault. Screams rose, orders broke, the line wavered. And then she saw it. The breach. Not small this time, not subtle. A massive enemy fighters pouring through a gap in the northern wall, flooding toward the heart of the outpost. Her chest tightened. She knew what it meant. If they reached the center, if they overwhelmed the command, the ridge would fall. Everyone would fall. She shifted her scope, lined the breach. Too many, too fast. Her rifle couldn't stop them all. The boy followed her gaze, his face blanching. What do we do? She almost said we hold, almost said we fight. But her brother's voice returned, raw, quiet, unrelenting. Sometimes you fight because no one else can. Her hand closed around the letter, the paper soft, edges worn, a weight she had carried for years. She knew then. She pulled the boy close, her voice low, urgent. Listen to me. If I fall, you don't stop, you keep firing. You hold this tower until the last second. Do you understand? His eyes widened, lips trembling. No, you can't. Do you understand? She pressed, fierce, unyielding. His throat worked, tears blurred his eyes. Finally, he nodded. She touched his shoulder, brief, firm. Good. Then she moved. Down the tower, through smoke and fire, toward the breach. The air seared her lungs. Bullets split the ground around her. Shouts tore the sky. She kept moving, not fast, not reckless, just steady. She reached the northern wall. The breach loomed ahead, shadows surging, teeth bared. She dropped to one knee, raised the rifle, breathed once. And fired. Each shot cut a thread in the swarm. Figures fell, stumbled, slowed. But still they came, always more. Her breath came ragged, her vision blurred. The letter pressed against her chest like a second heartbeat. She fired again, again. Then impact. A blast tore the ground beside her, heat seared, stone split. She hit the earth hard, ears ringing, chest burning. Her hands shook, but the rifle remained. She dragged it up, lined another shot, forced her body to obey. Above the chaos, she thought she heard his voice. Not the boy, not the soldiers, her brother. You don't have to carry me anymore. Tears burned her eyes, blurred the scope, but she smiled, small, broken. Because she finally understood. She wasn't carrying him, she was carrying herself. She steadied the scope one last time, breath slow, calm. One shot. The lead figure at the breach dropped. Confusion rippled through the swarm. For a heartbeat, the advance faltered, just enough. The outpost rallied. Soldiers surged, voices hoarse, firing with desperate fury. The breach held, for now. She lowered the rifle, chest heaving. Blood soaked her side, warm and heavy. She pressed the letter against it, as if the paper itself could hold her together. Her vision dimmed. The sky above blurred red and gold. And then the boy. He was there, dragging her back from the wall, his hands frantic, his voice breaking. Stay with me, please stay. She wanted to tell him it was too late, wanted to tell him it didn't matter, but the words wouldn't come. So instead, she pressed the letter into his hand. Her fingers curled over his, weak but firm. Remember, she whispered. His tears fell onto the paper. He nodded, sobbing. I will, I promise. Her eyes closed. The sound of battle faded. Silence rose. But this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was dignity. It was